What if the life you've built, your career, your relationships, your very identity, is nothing more than a carefully constructed mask? Across the world, millions are abandoning everything society told them to hold sacred. To the unawakened eye, it looks like madness, collapse, even self-destruction. But Carl Jung foresaw this 70 years ago. He called it the inevitable crisis of the soul, a rupture not of failure, but of evolution. Imagine realizing that your nervous system can no longer tolerate the illusion you once lived inside. This isn't rebellion, it's transformation. And once it begins, there is no turning back. Have you ever wondered why so many people are suddenly walking away from everything? It is not just a few restless souls, it is millions. They are leaving high-paying careers, abandoning marriages that seemed stable, turning their backs on friendships cultivated over decades. To the casual observer, this looks like destruction, as if these people have lost their way. But Carl Jung saw this pattern as inevitable. He described it as the crisis of individuation, the moment when the soul revolts against the life built only for the world. He warned that once this turning point is reached, no force can stop it. The story begins quietly, almost invisibly. A man sits in his office, his shelves filled with awards, his bank account overflowing. Yet every morning he wakes with a heaviness in his chest. The meetings feel scripted, the conversations hollow. He wonders when he became an actor trapped inside a role he no longer believes in. A woman attends a family gathering and realizes that she is smiling through clenched teeth, repeating words she does not mean, carrying traditions that feel like costumes stitched for someone else. These are not failures, they are signals. The psyche is cracking open, exposing what Jung called the false self, the persona, the mask created to survive. The result is a crisis that feels unbearable. You may look at your life and think, I have done everything society asked of me. I have achieved, I have complied, I have given. And yet something inside declares, this is not my life. It feels like betrayal, like abandoning everything that once defined you. But Jung believed this rupture is the beginning of authenticity. It is the first tearing of the chrysalis before transformation. The unbearable restlessness is not weakness. It is the self announcing itself, demanding a new order of being. The lesson is simple yet terrifying. What you once called stability may have been a prison. What you thought was identity may have been only a mask. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But to claim that privilege, you must first allow the collapse. You must face the grief of realizing the life you built does not fit the soul that has awakened within you. This is why millions are quietly walking away. They are not destroying their lives. They are allowing their false selves to die so that something real can emerge. So, I ask you this when you feel that same pressure inside you, that quiet whisper telling you this life no longer belongs to you, will you dare to listen? Will you face the collapse of the persona? Or will you keep performing, smiling, pretending until your soul demands the truth in ways you can no longer ignore? Because once the mask begins to crack, there is only one path forward. The question is not whether you will walk it, but when. What if the life you are living is not truly yours, but a performance Jung called this performance the persona, the mask each of us wears to survive in society? It is not false in the sense of a lie, but false in the sense of incompleteness. The persona is the professional you, the social you, the polite family member. It is the version of yourself that learned which behaviors would be rewarded and which truths must remain hidden. For a time, this mask serves you well. It allows you to function, to belong, to achieve. But there comes a moment when the mask begins to crack, and once it does, the truth it conceals demands to be seen. Consider the story of Jung's patient, a successful banker. Every day he entered boardrooms where millions were discussed, strategies planned, futures drawn in numbers and charts. Yet he confessed to Jung that while everyone else seemed engaged, he sat there with a single thought echoing in his mind. We are all pretending this matters. He saw himself speaking, nodding, agreeing, but he no longer believed the words leaving his own mouth. It was as if he were watching himself from the outside, an actor reciting lines in a play that had long since lost its meaning. This realization shattered him. It felt like madness. But Jung told him it was not madness, it was clarity. The result of this clarity is often unbearable tension. You continue to play the role, but you feel the split inside widening. At dinner with friends, you nod and laugh, but a voice inside whispers, "I do not belong here." At work, you meet deadlines, deliver results, but every success feels like ash in your mouth. The mask is no longer protective, it is suffocating, and the more you try to force it to fit, the more your soul rebels. Some develop anxiety, some depression, others physical symptoms with no medical explanation. The body itself begins to reject the persona. The lesson is profound. The persona is necessary, but it is not the self. It is a bridge, not a home. Jung believed that the greatest danger in life is to mistake the mask for the face beneath it. The cracking of the persona is not the end of your identity. It is the beginning of individuation. To see your mask as separate from your essence is the first step toward becoming whole. But wholeness requires sacrifice. You must be willing to let the false image die. And that death often looks like collapse to those still committed to the performance. So I ask you this: how many masks are you wearing right now? How much of your life is an act rehearsed so often that even you believe it? And more importantly, what will you do when the mask begins to slip? Will you tighten the straps and keep smiling for the crowd? Or will you let the mask fall and risk the loneliness that follows, trusting that behind it waits a face you have not yet dared to see? The death of the persona is terrifying, but it is also the gateway to your true life. The question is whether you will walk through it. What if true awakening does not begin in the light, but in the darkness? Jung insisted that individuation is impossible without descent into the shadow. The shadow is every part of yourself that society told you to deny, repress, or bury. It holds your rage, your envy, your lust, your greed, your arrogance, your wounds, your unspoken desires. To the ego, the shadow is shameful. To the awakened soul, the shadow is necessary. Because until you confront it, you remain divided, half alive, projecting what you cannot face onto others. Imagine a man who prides himself on being generous and humble. He donates to charity, speaks gently, smiles often. But inside he secretly envies the wealthy, resents the successful, and craves recognition he pretends not to need. As long as he denies these parts, he cannot see them as his own. Instead, he projects them. He despises billionaires, condemns arrogance in others, mocks those who boast. But in truth, he is only condemning himself. Society functions on this projection. We bond by agreeing who the villains are. We maintain order by throwing our darkness onto others. This is why Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The result of awakening is that projection stops working. When you integrate the shadow, you begin to recognize your own greed in the billionaires. You criticize your own authoritarian streak in the leaders. You oppose your own unconsciousness in the people you judge as asleep. This recognition is not comfortable. It is humiliating, but it is also liberating. Because the moment you claim your shadow, it no longer controls you. You stop being a puppet of your unconscious drives. You begin to live as a whole human being. The lesson is that true light is impossible without darkness. Many think spiritual awakening means becoming pure, positive, endlessly loving. But Jung revealed the opposite. Awakening means owning your capacity for darkness, because only then can your light be genuine. Otherwise, your light is performance, your kindness is image management, your compassion is a mask. To be whole is to hold both the saint and the sinner, the angel and the beast, without disowning either. This is why shadow work feels so dangerous. Because once you own your shadow, you can no longer play society's games of projection. You refuse to condemn scapegoats. You will not join in collective hatred. You stop participating in the rituals of blame. To society, this makes you dangerous. So I ask you, which parts of yourself are you still running from? Which qualities do you despise in others that may actually live inside you? Can you admit your own hunger for power, your own need for specialness, your own capacity to wound? Or will you keep throwing your darkness onto the world, condemning others while refusing to see yourself? Jung warned us that the shadow is a narrow door, and everyone who seeks wholeness must pass through it. The question is not whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is whether you will face it, or whether it will keep controlling your life from the dark. What if the clock you live by is not natural, but an illusion? Society demands obedience to mechanical time. Wake at 7, arrive at 9, deliver results by 5 plan. Your next 5 years, retire at 65. This rhythm is not the rhythm of the soul. Jung discovered that as consciousness awakens, it no longer experiences time in this rigid, linear way. Instead, it enters what he called psychological time, where moments are circular, symbolic, and filled with meaning. To the awakened, time is no longer a machine, it becomes alive. Picture an engineer Jung once worked with, brilliant, respected, successful. He sat in planning meetings as his colleagues mapped out quarterly goals, 5-year projections, endless charts of progress. But as he listened, a strange laughter rose inside him. Not arrogance, not mockery, absurdity. He told Jung, "How can we pretend to control life with calendars when every dream I have feels more real than tomorrow's deadline?" He began to experience synchronicities, thinking of a friend before they called, seeing symbols in his dreams that unfolded days later, recognizing patterns in events that seemed to defy logic. To him, these were not coincidences. They were revelations that time itself was speaking. The result of this shift is disorientation. Society insists on forward motion, more work, more productivity, more accumulation. But when you awaken, you no longer believe in forward. You begin to sense that past, present, and future overlap, that life unfolds in rhythms deeper than schedules. A grief from 10 years ago may still feel more alive than today's to-do list. A moment of presence with a loved one may feel more valuable than an entire year of achievements. Suddenly, showing up at 9 a.m. feels violent to your psyche because your soul is still processing the dream it received that morning. Society's clock becomes unbearable, like forcing a river into a cage of numbers. The lesson here is that awakening pulls you out of mechanical time and into mythic time. In mechanical time, life is measured by quantity, years lived, money earned, milestones checked off. In psychological time, life is measured by depth, moments of meaning, symbols revealed, synchronicities that transform. Jung called this a causal orderedness, an intelligence beyond cause and effect. To live in this way is to recognize that the self does not move on a schedule. It moves in seasons, in symbols, in sacred rhythms. And once you taste this truth, returning to mechanical time feels like prison. So, I ask you this: how much of your life is dictated by the clock? How often do you measure your worth in hours, worked deadlines, met goals, achieved? And can you sense the deeper rhythm beneath it all? The dream that still lingers in your body, the coincidence that won't let go, the sacred timing that no calendar could ever predict. Jung believed that when we awaken, our very experience of time changes. The question is, will you continue to force yourself into society's machine, or will you allow yourself to be carried by the organic rhythm of your own soul? What if the pain you are carrying is not even your own? Jung warned that when the psyche awakens, you do not only meet your individual unconscious, you also become exposed to the collective unconscious. This is the layer of psyche that holds the wounds, traumas, and archetypes of humanity itself. Most people keep this unconscious by projecting it outward, blaming others, dividing the world into heroes and villains. But when you stop projecting, when you integrate your own shadow, you begin to feel the shadows of others. And suddenly the burden becomes almost unbearable. Consider the story of a woman Jung worked with. She believed for years that she was too sensitive. She cried easily, absorbed the moods of others, carried guilt that was not hers. At first it seemed pathological, but as her analysis deepened, she realized she was not merely sensitive, she was conscious. She could feel what others refused to feel. At family gatherings, she carried the unspoken grief of 3 generations. In meetings, she sensed the childhood wounds driving every argument. Watching the news, she did not just see events. She felt archetypal patterns, ancient dramas repeating. It is like being awake in a world of sleepwalkers, she told Jung, and carrying all the dreams they refuse to remember. The result of this awareness is often exhaustion. Many awakened individuals suffer from anxiety, depression, even chronic illnesses doctors cannot explain. They are not just processing their own material, they are absorbing the psychic overflow of everyone around them. Jung called this participation mystique, a state in which boundaries dissolve, and the individual unconsciously identifies with the collective. In modern terms, it is like being a lightning rod for unintegrated shadow. Narcissists are drawn to you. Strangers spill their traumas into your lap. Family systems unconsciously assign you the role of scapegoat, the one who carries the symptoms of everyone else's denial. And society exploits this, using you as a vessel to process what it refuses to face. The lesson is harsh but liberating. You cannot heal in an environment committed to unconsciousness. Just as an addict cannot get sober in a bar, an awakened soul cannot integrate while surrounded by those who cling to projection. This is why isolation, solitude, or retreat is not weakness. It is necessity. Jung called this the transcendent function, the withdrawal of energy from the outer world in order to create a new balance within. It may look like you are pulling away. In truth, you are creating space for a new level of consciousness to emerge, one capable of carrying both your own shadow and the collective's without being destroyed by it. So, I ask you, how much of what you feel each day is truly yours? How much of your exhaustion, your sadness, your rage is actually the unprocessed material of those around you? And if you realized you were carrying not only your own darkness, but the weight of an entire system, would you continue to hold it, or would you step back, withdraw, and allow yourself the solitude required to find your center again? Jung believed that what looks like withdrawal is often the preparation for transformation. The question is, will you honor that need for solitude, or will you keep drowning in a sea of shadows that were never yours to carry? What if the deepest part of you has an agenda completely different from society's? Jung called this center the self. Not the ego, not the persona, but the true organizing principle of the psyche. The self does not care about social approval, financial success, or external validation. It cares only about wholeness, about the realization of your unique path. And when the self decides that your life has drifted too far from its purpose, it begins to intervene. These interventions rarely look gentle. They arrive as crises, breakdowns, betrayals, or inexplicable compulsions. One of Jung's patients was a respected doctor with a flawless reputation. He earned well, had a family, a home, and the admiration of his community. Yet he was plagued by recurring dreams of a solitary cabin in the mountains where he lived simply and wrote poetry. At first, he dismissed these dreams as fantasies, but they returned more vivid each time until they became unbearable. Then came the symptoms. He developed chest pains with no medical explanation, anxiety that no medication could soothe. His body itself seemed to rebel against the life he was living. Finally, at age 52, he could resist no longer. He left his practice, his social position, even much of his family's approval, to live in that cabin. To outsiders, it looked like a breakdown, but Jung understood it as obedience to the self. The man spent his final years writing poetry that revealed profound insights into the human spirit, words that survived long after his successful life had ended. The result of obeying the self is paradoxical. On one hand, you lose what society values most: status, security, approval. On the other, you gain what the soul values most: authenticity, integration, meaning. But the cost is high. To follow the self often requires betraying the expectations of others, your parents' dreams, your partner's need for stability, your own ego's attachment to identity, all must be sacrificed. Jung was blunt about this. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but that privilege feels like betrayal to everyone invested in who you were pretending to be. The lesson is that individuation is not a hobby. It is not optional self-improvement. It is a demand of the psyche as relentless as gravity. You can ignore it for a time, but the cost will rise. Symptoms will intensify. Crises will multiply. Because the self is not interested in your comfort, it is interested in your completion, and it will dismantle anything in your life that obstructs that path. This is why people abandon careers, marriages, identities that once seemed unshakable. They are not making whimsical choices. They are answering a call that cannot be denied. So, I ask you, what is your self demanding of you right now? What dreams return again and again no matter how you dismiss them? What symptoms haunt your body, refusing to be explained away? And most of all, what life would you live if you no longer had to perform for others but only had to be true to your soul? Jung believed that ignoring the self leads to decay, while obeying it leads to transformation. The question is, will you betray the expectations of others to honor the truth of yourself? Or will you betray yourself to preserve the comfort of others? What if leaving society is not the end, but only the beginning? Jung saw individuation not as permanent exile, but as a cycle of death and rebirth. First the persona collapses, then the shadow emerges, then the self calls you into solitude. But this leaving is not the destination, it is the chrysalis. Just as a caterpillar dissolves inside its cocoon, you too must dissolve, shedding the structures that once defined you. To others, this looks like breakdown, but Jung insisted it is metamorphosis. And what emerges is not the same being that entered. Consider the pattern Jung observed again and again. Individuals who honored the leaving, who allowed themselves to descend into shadow, to live outside the demands of persona, to surrender to the self, did not remain isolated forever. Over time, something new formed within them. Jung called this the transcendent function, a psychological synthesis that bridges opposites, conscious and unconscious, inner and outer, personal and collective. Those who reach this stage often return to society, but not as they were before. They returned as carriers of consciousness. Their presence itself changed the field around them. They did not preach. They did not need to persuade. Simply by embodying their wholeness, they became catalysts for others. The result of this transformation is paradoxical. You leave because you no longer fit. You withdraw because the collective cannot tolerate your authenticity. But if you endure the solitude, if you allow the metamorphosis to complete, you return with a new kind of presence. No longer reactive, no longer projecting, no longer enslaved to mechanical time. You embody a rhythm that awakens those around you. Others may feel disturbed, but they also feel drawn. Because what you carry is not just your own healing, it is the seed of a new humanity. Jung believed this was the evolutionary function of individuation, not just personal salvation, but collective renewal. The lesson is that you cannot truly serve society until you have left it. You cannot bring light until you have faced your own darkness. You cannot awaken others while you are still asleep. The leaving is preparation. The solitude is gestation. And the return is not about fitting back into old roles, but about seeding something entirely new. This is why Jung said the individual who honors the self becomes a kind of pioneer charting a path that others will eventually follow. Not everyone awakens at once. It happens in waves. Each person who dares to leave and return makes it easier for the next. What looks like collapse on a mass scale may actually be humanity's slow-motion breakthrough. So, I ask you this, will you trust the leaving, even when it feels like death? Will you honor the solitude, even when it feels like exile? And most of all, will you return not as who you were, but as who you have become? carrying the consciousness that only your journey could create? Jung believed that this is how humanity evolves, not through collective agreement, but through individuals who dare to live the truth of their souls. The question is no longer whether society will collapse. The question is whether you will become one of those who help rebuild it, not by force, not by ideology, but by presence. Because in the end, individuation is not about leaving life behind. It is about returning to life reborn. We have walked through the 5 great transformations. Jung foresaw the collapse of the persona, the descent into shadow, the awakening to psychological time, the burden of the collective unconscious, and finally, the uncompromising demands of the self. Each of these on its own feels overwhelming. Together, they dismantle the life you once knew. But as we have seen, this dismantling is not destruction. It is preparation. It is the slow and painful cracking of the chrysalis before something entirely new takes flight. We have seen that millions across the world are feeling this same pull. To the unawakened, it looks like madness. To Jung, it was prophecy. He believed that this exodus is not collapse, but evolution. And he warned that resisting it only deepens the suffering. The self will not be silenced. It will demand your attention through dreams, through symptoms, through crises until you listen. The lesson of individuation is clear. You cannot awaken by clinging to your old roles. You cannot serve the collective by staying unconscious within it. You must leave in order to return transformed. Only then can you bring something real back to a world drowning in illusions. And only then does your suffering reveal its purpose, that you were chosen to carry a piece of humanity's next consciousness. So, I leave you with this, as Jung once said, who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakes? Which are you doing right now? Are you still dreaming the dream of the collective? Or are you ready to awaken into your true self, no matter what must be left behind? If this message resonates with you, you are not alone. There are thousands walking this same path. Subscribe to this channel and join us as we navigate the greatest transformation of our time. Share in the comments. What you are being called to leave your honesty, ye may give someone else permission to honor their own path. And if you know someone who feels that unbearable restlessness, share this video with them. The world does not need more masks. It needs your true face. It needs the self you are becoming. Trust the leaving. Trust the solitude. Trust the return. Because in a world of illusions, individuation is the ultimate revolution.